Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to code review of Alkaa application written by Igor Escodro. Now I'm probably mispronouncing both the names of the author and the application, so I'm really sorry for that. According to GitHub's description, Alkaa is open source app to manage your tasks quickly and easily. So it's a task manager application. Great. Let's scroll down a bit. So Alkaa means begin or start and finish, is a simple to-do list project to study the latest components, architecture tools and APIs released in Android platform. The project evolved a lot in the last year and now is available in Google Play. Great, simply great. Now, one important point to note right away is that Alkaa is educational project for study purposes. And there is really a big difference between educational projects, I call them sometimes toy projects, and real professional projects that you do for money. However, I don't like reviewing educational projects, so I will be treating Alkaa as though it was a professional project. However, just keep in mind that Alkaa being educational project means that probably there are a lot of stuff, new stuff, that the author of the application isn't very familiar with. So probably he made a lot of mistakes and a lot of try and error and use some stuff not in the best way possible. So I will be hard on him, but honestly I admire this thing because too often developers just bring new technologies into their professional projects because they want to try them out and pollute their projects and make them less maintainable for the long term. So developers who take a step back and do these kind of educational projects for themselves, like I really admire that. That's the way to go in my opinion. Alright, enough with the GitHub page, let's get to the application itself. When I start reviewing new projects, the first thing I do is to measure the size of the project. And it's very important because projects of size 10,000 lines of code will be very different from projects of size 100,000 lines of code. So the first thing I do is doing clog, count lines of code, that's what clog means. And I will direct clog to app, source and main, right? So now I can see that Alkaa has approximately 3,500 lines of code and 2/3 of them are Kotlin and the rest are XML. So it's really not very big application, like a small application. The first file that I would like to open when I get to the source code is basically build.gradle file of the entire application. And at the top of this file I see a bunch of constants defined, and these constants will probably be used in modules build.gradle file where dependencies are defined. And it's really surprising in this case because you usually want to extract the versions of the dependencies into some centralized location when you have multiple modules, just to make sure that all the modules use the same version of some dependency. In this case, however, this application has just one single module app, and I really don't see reason to have these dependencies defined here. So probably I would recommend to move these definitions into modules build.gradle file. And nothing else interesting here. So the next file I want to see is this build.gradle of the entire application. Okay, a bunch of plugins related to Kotlin and navigation. Some imports from other Gradle files, not interesting. This one is interesting because I don't see reason to keep the minification disabled for release builds, but maybe it's just because it's kind of an educational project, maybe Igor just didn't care about that. So data binding, Android extensions, and some capped options. Now let's get to the dependencies section. These are a bunch of some generic and relatively standard dependencies, and as you see, Igor used basically the versions defined in the project's build.gradle file, so I would probably prefer to have these versions here, at least until I have different modules that I need to coordinate these versions with, and then maybe I'd consider moving them into some centralized location. And Timber for logging, and Coin dependency injection framework for dependency injection, RX, architecture tests. Okay, great. One thing I want to point out is that I really like the structure of this dependencies declaration. Igor basically separated the dependencies into groups and gave a little bit of comment to each group. So now when I come here, I can just at a glance instantly get an impression of which dependencies this application use. It's really great and it's a good practice. I would even recommend to maybe separate this Android group into several smaller groups just to make it even more readable and even more understandable. And the benefit of that, especially if you work on a project with many people, when people change dependencies and update dependencies, you know exactly what happened. And these commands, they are really helpful in managing stuff and avoiding some stupid mistakes. So for this simple application, there's no need to review anything else related to its build configuration and dependencies. So now let's get to the code, and basically that will be an Android manifest file. That's the first file we need to review. Okay, the only permission it uses is boot completed. Interesting. I wouldn't expect like task manager application to use boot completed permission, but maybe it has some notifications stuff. Then after boot, I would like to maybe check that some tasks are not overdue and then notify the user if they are. Something like that. And it uses custom application subclass. Nothing special here. Okay, so that's just Timber initialization. And this is coin initialization. Just one single activity. So this is a single activity application, probably uses fragments inside activities. And one single receiver that uses this boot completed. Now, I don't want to review this broadcast receiver because broadcast receivers are usually very small components and there's not too much meat in them. Even if you write your broadcast receiver and it's very bad code, usually you wouldn't do any work inside broadcast receiver. So in this case, like on boot completed, and it's delegated to some worker that gets executed by a work manager. Okay, so broadcast receivers usually just receive broadcasts, send them right away, and it's okay if your code here is not optimized or something. Just make sure it doesn't have bugs. So I'm not really interested in that. What I do want to see is how this main activity is implemented. Alright, right away I can see that it uses two view models, and by the name of these models I can probably guess that this view model is specific to the activity, and this view model, shared view model, will probably be shared with other fragments as well. And I have this drawer selected item, so that's probably some kind of an index, but I'm getting really suspicious right away. Why? Well, this application uses view models, so view models are preserved on configuration changes, and then Igor has this one single variable here. So unless this variable gets kept on configuration change in some other manner, there might be a problem here because some state will be kept in view models and this variable will basically be erased on configuration change. So let's see if this variable is being retained on configuration change. So navigation main drawer. Okay, so no. Navigate, no. That's not what I was looking for, and nothing else. So this variable is not retained on configuration change, whereas the state saved in these two view models is retained, and that might be a problem. And even if it's not a problem right now, it might become a problem in the future. So you want to be very careful about that. So if you're using view models, I would probably call that a code smell. If you have some variables just dangling like that in activities and fragments, take a closer look at them. Most probably you want to keep them on configuration change as well. And in onCreate we do set content view and init components, and then we use this view model to load categories and then update the drawer. Let's see the init components method. Basically what it says here is that variable host will be set to fragment from this ID, from this container, and this fragment will be casted to navhost fragment, but if it happens to be null, then basically this method will return. And that's really not a very good approach. Why? Because most probably you expect this fragment not to be null. You expect something to be there, because if it's not, like you write application and you expect that you have navigation drawer, and along the way you discover that there is no navigation drawer there, so it's probably a bug. And by doing all this magic, Kotlin magic with nullables, and then basically returning, you mask this bug. So the code will not, the application will not crash, but you will not get any notification about what went wrong. So in this case, I'd probably say that what you want to do is to crash the application if this fragment is null. You don't want to silently swallow this error. Okay, so we get nav controller, and then we set up action bar and update drawer. Let's see setup action bar method. Set support action bar. Historically, Android used action bars, and action bars were tightly coupled to activities. And then at some point we got toolbars. So toolbars are kind of standalone views that you can basically implement whatever you want with them, and they can have whatever functionality you want, and they can be anywhere on the screen, and etc. However, for some reason, I don't know why, for some reason, Googlers who implemented toolbar decided to provide this set support action bar. Basically, it's kind of a backward compatible way. So you implement toolbar and then you call this method, and the activity will treat the toolbar as though it is action bar. To be honest, in 2019, I would say you don't need to use this method anymore. Just implement your custom toolbar with all the logic and all the views that you need, because this method is very convenient if you want to have something simple as a toolbar. Something default, like back navigation and navigation drawer and stuff. But the moment you want something non-standard, this usage and this approach might become an issue. It might actually limit your options in the long run. So I would say just don't use it and go with completely custom toolbar without this thing. If you need to have back button and you need to have a hamburger icon, just implement them in your toolbar. It's not that difficult. Okay, set display show titled enabled. I don't remember what it does, doesn't care. And then navigation UI, that's probably part of the new navigation architecture component. Setup action bar with nav controller. So the Java doc of this method says that this setup action bar with nav controller method sets up the action bar and for use with nav controller. By calling this method, the title in the action bar will automatically be updated when the destination changes, assuming there is a valid label. The start destination, blah blah blah. Okay, great. Let's get back to code. So what this method does is basically allowing the navigation component to control the contents of your toolbar, basically to set titles and stuff like that. I don't like it. I think that insufficient separation between a user interface layer and application layer was and is the main problem of Android framework. And when toolbar was introduced to decouple basically this action bar stuff from activity, it was a very good step forward. And now we have navigation, which is like completely different concern from drawing titles on the screen and stuff. We have navigation controlling the contents of some text view on your screen. So it will probably be much better to have like navigation component, if you want to use it, have navigation component be responsible for navigation between screens, and on each screen you will have the logic that sets its title. And you can have this logic common to all the screens, but just don't make the navigation stuff control the contents of your screen. It's a really bad way to couple your application logic to user interface logic, and it's very unfortunate that this new navigation component has this method in my estimation. Okay, so when navigation changes, we do on navigate, and basically on navigate we get destination label and then update toolbar title. And that's very interesting because I've just read that this method setup action bar blah 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 should control the contents, makes the navigation component control the contents of toolbar's title, but here in on navigate method I can see that like it's overridden and it's controlled manually. So probably some application here, but it might be the case that I just don't understand how it works. By the way, it's the first time I see navigation component in any code base. I've never seen and never used it. Okay, and we've got shared view model, action bar title, observe. Okay, so this shared view model for some reason holds the action bar title, and when this title changes, we go and again set title. Why would you want to do that? I see. I think I know why is that. Despite this call, Igor will probably want to control the title of the toolbar from fragments. So fragments will be able to just grab this shared view model and set some action bar title variable in there, and then this will notify the activity, and the activity will update the title to this value. Okay, like in my estimation a little bit cumbersome, but if it works, it's alright. And now we have this on options item selected, and basically what it does should handle on nav destination selected. So basically it delegates navigation to this navigation component. Attempt to navigate to destination associated with the given menu item. Oh god. So this navigation component not only coupled to UI logic, but it is also coupled to the menu items, and well, I don't like that. So basically what it says here is that when you click on some item in your overflow menu, or not overflow, in your menu, so basically it will attempt to navigate to the destination associated with this item. And again, like I usually do that manually. I don't see a reason to use any navigation stuff for that. It looks like a very limiting approach, probably very limiting approach, but that's just my feeling right now without going into the details. So let's see what we've got else. Okay, so on back pressed, so if the back button pressed, we close the drawer if it's open. That's like standard thing if you use drawers. Update drawer list, where is this method called from? So basically the first time in on create, and the second time when the drawer is updated. Oh, look at that. Each time a drawer is updated, is open. Each time a drawer is open, Igor basically loads categories and updates the drawer. Why would that be the case? I don't know. Maybe it's needed. Okay, and this basically recreates the UI of navigation drawer, puts the right menus in there, and okay, set checked item. Great. Remember, as I said, like this variable, it will not be kept on configuration change. Probably that might be a problem. Navigate to category, update drawer, a bunch of animations here. Okay, we'll see why it's needed, and a bunch of constants. Okay, what can I say except for what I've already said? Look, first of all, this activity is dirty. It uses all kinds of very popular and fancy stuff, and I understand that Igor just wanted to learn about this stuff, so probably that's like not the best code he ever wrote, but this activity is dirty, and we need to understand that. The main problem with this activity is that it does too much things. So currently it stands at about 200 lines of code, but this application is really simple, almost trivial. So like if that would be a big application, this activity like would easily get to 1,000 or 2,000 lines of code if like we would keep writing it in the same manner. So what can I recommend? First of all, the first problem is that this activity handles lifecycle, and it also handles user interface logic. And this is a big thing that I advocate for, is for extraction of user interface logic from activities and fragments. So what am I talking about? Well, let's look at this update drawer list method. Well, it's definitely something related to user interface, right? We create a menu and then we set checked item. So this logic is what I call user interface logic. This logic is somehow responsible for what user sees and what he or she can interact with. And the very next method, navigate, has nothing to do with user interface logic, right? What it does is handles navigation between different screens in the application. So this is clearly application logic, maybe even partly business logic. And the fact that this activity has both user interface logic and application logic in it is really bad, because it will get out of hand really quickly. This application is simple and relatively small right now, and out of like 2000 Kotlin lines of code, 200 of them reside in this activity. So if this activity will be 20,000 lines of code, which is like small application but reasonable and complex application already, 2000 lines of code will reside in this activity? Well, probably not, but I'm sure that it will get to like 1000 lines of code easily for application of size 20,000 lines of Kotlin code. And you want to control that, you want to plan for that, and you want to be strategic about that. And the way to be strategic about that is not using view models. Okay, so let's get back to view models. This activity uses two view models. And basically, as far as I understand, the way people use view models, I'm not using view models by myself. I think it's a bad idea. But usually when I see view models being used, they're used as controllers or as presenters in MVP or MVC. So they take kind of application and business logic into them and let activities and fragments remain views to handle user interface logic. The problem is that all this stuff like nav controller and fragments and menus and whatnot, all of that is tied to the activity context. So all these objects probably have references to activities, so you can't really work with them inside view models, because view models shouldn't have references to activity contexts, even transitive references. It would create a memory leak. So you can't put all this logic inside view models, so you are forced to put all this logic inside your activity. But then if your activity also acts as UI logic container, then you get spaghetti code, and then you get maintenance problems. So what I do recommend to do is basically extracting user interface logic into a standalone class, and then letting the activity take on its natural responsibility, which is controller. And I gave a talk about this and I explained why it's the case and why it's the best way to develop Android applications at DroidCon in Berlin in 2017 or 18, I don't remember. But anyway, I will put a link to that talk to this video, so you can go and watch this talk and understand why I say that it's the best approach and why it's much better. So you basically take all the UI logic and extract it into standalone class, and the activity becomes like kind of controller or presenter or whatever you want to call it. But it takes on responsibility to manage the application flow, and user interface is delegated to standalone class. And if you want to see how this approach translates into an entire architectural pattern, well, then I have an entire course, like 4 or 5 hours course on this specific subject of how to architect Android applications in a clean way. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think that will be all. And I didn't get too deep into this application, like I reviewed maybe just 1 or 2 classes, but the stuff that we discussed right now is really crucially important. It makes the difference between maintainable application and something that has files with thousands of lines of code in it in the long run. So I would highly recommend that you consider what I said and maybe try to apply that. And Igor, once again, like, good job, man. I understand that it's your educational application and I respect that, and that's the way to go. Professional developers shouldn't bring new toys into production code bases. Professional developers should have like toy applications on the side, and if they want to test some new tool, they should do that in their toy application long before they even suggest that it will be adapted in their professional work. Thumbs up and really good job, and like, you try to learn. I really hope that this review will help you. Thanks everybody for watching. If you like this video, then click that like button to let me know that this kind of content is really interesting to you, and I will know to make more code review videos. Goodbye and have a nice day, everybody.